Welcome to Rehab Unplugged. We dive deep into physiotherapy and rehabilitation, bringing you honest conversations with industry experts and uncovering the tools and stories shaping the world of rehab today. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. Today we have a special guest joining us to discuss remote therapeutic monitoring. And our guest today is Matt Jurek, an expert in RTM and the founder of Osprey RTM Solutions. Matt has been at the forefront of helping physiotherapists integrate technology into their practices to improve patient outcomes. He is also passionate about finding innovative ways to bridge the gap between in-person treatment and remote care. Matt, we're thrilled to have you with us today.
Good morning, Andres. My pleasure.
Perfect, Matt. Let's just jump right in. So this is a little bit of personal background about you. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how did you get involved in the world of physiotherapy and what led you to focus on remote therapeutic monitoring?
Yeah, I've got an interesting story, and the long and short of it is my wife and I are both physical therapists. We've been in the game for over a decade. We chose to do life a little bit differently that kind of flexed our ability to explore, basically. And the coinciding time of it was right around the time that these codes came available to bill as a physical therapist, right? So January 1, 2022. And seeing these codes, I had the time to look at what they might represent on a clinic level. Having been a director, assisting in opening clinics, managing folks, being a true physical therapist in the outpatient sector myself, I saw these codes as one, finally a recognition for the care that we give as physical therapists. We truly care. And if we go that extra step, which oftentimes we do, there are ways that we can get reimbursed for our time now. So having that viewpoint, it encouraged me to look deeper at the true meaning of the codes, the workflows around them, what it might look like in different cultures, whether it's assisted living all the way to at home to outpatient therapy, and bridge a gap between software, Medicare, and the real world physical therapy. The exciting part is more than Medicare is catching on to these codes and assisting in the reimbursement of them. So it's going to be, I'm viewing it as a next step towards the future of physical therapy. So to be there in that space to assist that transition for therapists was exciting. And so filled that niche. Like I said, I was blessed with the time and I dug in and here we are.
Matt, RTM is still a relatively new concept for many clinicians. Mm-hmm. So in short terms, could you please explain to me and the audience what RTM is?
You bet. So RTM is the monitoring of your patient in real time during an active plan of care. What this can look like is you have to begin with using either a software as a medical device or hardware as a medical device that's going to provide data back to you as the therapist and influence your actions, trigger your actions and interactions with that patient. But the big scope is providing an accountability as well as real-time data of what's happening between clinic visits. An invaluable set of information that we can retrieve when we only have 1 to maybe 3 times a week of 30 to 40 minutes with the patient. It's that plus the communication efforts that happen organically within the clinic as you're serving that patient outside of those clinic times, as well as going that one extra little step to make sure that your patient really feels like they have a team behind them that's assisting them to meet their goals. That's the big umbrella scope of things. Yes, there's nuances, but that is what RTM means.
And I assume, from my perspective, when you talk about a remote therapeutic monitoring, there is a piece of technology that will bridge the gap between what the patient experience at the clinic with the therapist and when the patient is at home. So when we talk about physiotherapy and technology, it might not seem like an obvious match at first.
Really, the most simple way to look at it is, what do we know as therapists when we talk about healing and functional gains? Healing takes a lot longer than 6 weeks and 2 times a week in the clinic. Motor reprogramming, control, strength, balance. These are all items that PT targets and addresses effectively. But the true magic really happens when we've assisted that patient in habitual changes, and that occurs at home. So what do we do? What have we done for ages? We provided a home exercise program, right? Here you go, patient. I want you to do these at home. We've never had the real-time look on the true compliance of the patient, if you will, at its most basic level. So that is a part of that code. We can, if we provide the right data when it comes to patient subjective responses, compliance, those components, that is a reimbursable part of RTM. Yes, you can have some awesome hardware that you send home with the patient that's going to track steps, activity, yada, yada. That is real-time objective data coming back too, that is helpful in the PT space that's covering those basics. So everywhere on both ends of the spectrum in terms of that technology that you're providing, and in between is assisting that component where we know science takes over and says a tissue takes this long to heal, strength takes this long to gain. And it's really demonstrating the effect that we can have outside of the clinic and combining the two. You know, what happens in the clinic, what happens at home is just as important to a patient's recovery.
Absolutely. Because I think, and also as you have mentioned before, and as we have spoke before, most of the process and the healing process of the patient will happen at home, of course, following the instructions from a therapist. But I think that home aspect is so important through the healing process that I think having a remote therapeutic monitoring program, it's extremely important. Now, when I was doing a little bit of research for this podcast episode, I found a lot of confusion online between RTM, Remote Therapeutic Monitoring, and RPM, Remote Physiological Monitoring. So, Matt, could you please explain to me and the audience what's the difference between these two concepts?
Yeah, when you break it down, it gets pretty easy. And when you'll see RPM listed as patient monitoring or physiological monitoring. What made the light go off for me is when I started calling it physiological monitoring. You know, that's the blood sugar monitoring, the heart rate monitoring, respiratory kind of issues when it comes to COPD. And those were in existence for physicians to bill anyhow, because they knew how important those types of monitoring were at home of the patient, that data set is. So when RTM codes were written, it was basically a mirror at first, and it's been refined, but a mirror of those codes for therapists to directly therapists to code. So you got your occupational, your speech, your physical therapy. It's for our profession, which is a really cool place to be and speak on behalf of our profession in terms of the acknowledgement that it provides. Physicians can bill the RTM, but their place is more specifically, you know, especially when you're talking about a cardiac surgeon, those specialty type of physicians, they're going to be billing the RPM. We're going to be doing the RTM. And again, back to the other question within this, I'll never stand in a place where face-to-face contact has been replaced by technology as a physical therapist. It's invaluable when you see and build a rapport with a patient face-to-face. You have that 5-finger magic with them. So the RTM does not replace that. It just makes the care given stronger. So that's a fear sometimes with owners, that they're going to lose actual visits, and that's how they make money. And that's not the case. I mean, there's a place for RTM to occur from the onset, as that patient is doing multiple times per week, to when they're in a management progression. RTM is a favorable tool to use to assist your patient within still coming to the clinic. Yeah.
How do you think, Matt, that have recent changes in Medicare reimbursement codes supported the growth and adoption of RTM? And what challenges do you or did you face when implementing RTM in your clinic?
The progression or regression, I should say, maybe when it comes to reimbursement percentages that we see off codes, is a big motivator for clinics nationwide to find a way to stay alive. So after having seen CMS continually decrease their reimbursements to us, it puts us and corners us in a place where the population that needs us most oftentimes cannot be served because ends don't meet when it comes to reimbursement. So yes, we're getting professional recognition, assisting our patients in improved care, and then reimbursement comes along with that in RTM capacity, the ability to build those codes. So it's assisting us to still keep our heads above water, basically, and see these Medicare type patients. The hurdles involved in that is, as much as it is software, it's people too. So all of your staff having little bits of habitual changes to add up to good patient compliance, good use of the software, good communication efforts, which result in these codes being able to be built. That needs a workflow that is well thought out, well trained, and well monitored by you and your staff. That's the biggest hurdle. You got PTs that have practiced for a decade and they know exactly where the goniometer is and that the clock is on the west wall. If you switch those two, it's going to throw their daily life off and you're going to hear about it for the next year, right? So we understand the culture that exists in a clinic, and to change a habit or pick up a habit does necessitate that well thought out workflow. This is what we're going to do now, kind of actionable steps, and then reminder. That's the biggest hurdle when it comes to on clinic floors, is that habitual change that needs to occur.
It's very funny you mentioned, because definitely when you work at an organization, you can definitely see how change it's so difficult for so many people, and I think it's definitely a skill for people to be open to change. So I definitely understand if anybody out there, they're hesitant maybe to start an RTM program at their clinic. I understand the challenges, and I understand why you might be a little bit hesitant to start this. But I guess what you're trying to say as well, Matt, is if you have a consultant or you have a company or you're using a technology that facilitates this process, it makes everything so much easier.
It's key. Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. People are doing it now. So if you are matched with a company that provides that, or you reach out for a little extra support, you don't go reinventing the wheel for yourself. Rely heavily on somebody that's been there, done it, and can assist those guidance steps. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And how does RTM fit into your practice workflow? And what I mean by this question is, are there any best practices that you've discovered for making it an easy part of your daily routine, just so that this change is not so difficult to go through?
You bet. The couple measures that have been taken is to kind of isolate those workflows, if you will. And there basically are three ways you can do it. You can put all the work on each one of your therapists. Honestly, unless it's a tight-knit group of a couple therapists that all have skin in the game, that's a difficult thing to do. If you're a solo practitioner, that works. You are required for the work, but we can find ways to give yourself credit for those communication efforts that you already have to do. But if you're a clinic of 3+ PTs, what is working best and most efficiently to keep things in-house, if that's your choice, is to allocate an individual that has the time, set a place for 1 week, depending on your caseload, which is another point that I'd like to make. This is not just a Medicare thing. Around 60 to 70% of commercial insurances are now reimbursing this. Third-party insurances like motor vehicle accidents are reimbursing this too. So you could have easily 70 to 80, 90% of your patient caseload coming in involved in RTM. Do you have to spend 20 minutes with each patient to be able to build these codes? No, and that's where the nuance and the understanding needs to happen up front. But time does need to be set aside to make sure that the patients are compliant, the PTs are compliant, all the staff is on board, and somebody's overwatching this, right? And they have some of that time set across. If it's bonus time in their week, great. If it's a mother returning from maternity leave and she doesn't want to come back into the clinic full time, but she's willing to work at home. If you're able to afford an hour or two a week of a PTA on staff to do RTM duties, that's where people are finding putting somebody in-house in charge is working best. So, we call them a champion, for lack of a better term. Then the third option is to basically step back as much as you can. You still have to do those interpersonal things to engage the patient, follow up with the patient, and make sure that they're doing their thing. But there are third-party companies now that provide that communication effort to tally the times in order to kind of give the breadth of what can be done through RTM for your patient and maximal return on the back end for you. So those are the couple. We're seeing the success in those latter two that I described in the PT workflow world.
Let's talk now about measuring success. All right. So what metrics or data from RTM did you find most helpful in tracking patient outcomes, or have you seen any measurable improvements in patient recovery timelines when using RTM?
Really good question. I believe that even though we're 2.5 years into having these codes available to bill, you mentioned on the onset, the hesitancy that exists, and it still does. So because of that hesitancy or lack of knowledge, or slow to pull the trigger because you don't want to cause too many riffles in your clinic, right? All of those things have added up to a late adoption of RTM in the PT world. That being said, I don't believe that there's enough data. It's being collected, being measured in terms of patient outcomes. Was this patient discharged earlier? Did they do one less session? I don't know how fully those metrics are going to come out or represent things. What we're seeing is stepping back and taking those subjective questionnaires that you probably provide anyhow to measure the success of your clinic, patient outcome related, right? When you hand that questionnaire to the patient, how likely are they to recommend you? How well did they feel supported? When you look at those type of metrics in clinics that collect that set of data to measure their product, right? We're seeing, 10, 12% better scores when it comes to a patient felt they recovered more fully. They met their goals in a higher percentage range. They felt that they had a larger team, more support behind them as going through this. So all of those are favorable in the way of patient supported care, right? So we're happy to see that, and we're happy to go with that moving forward as a measure of success in the world of RTM at this point.
And when you were replying this question, I was also thinking to myself, what have you seen any difference in how different age groups respond to using RTM technology?
Of course, the ease of use is there, right? I mentioned earlier, this is not just a Medicare program. Now it's becoming utilized across the spectrum of insurance and payers. But the best studied is those that fall directly under CMS, because those were the ones that had to reimburse first, right? So clinics were seeing it as such. And so we're talking the over 65 population. I judged that book too quick, right? And they're not going to be able to do this. They're not going to be compliant, yada, yada. But when I started seeing compliance, I thought about it more fully. And honestly, those folks, those 7-year-old folks, a decade ago, they were 60. They were still working. They had a smartphone in their pocket then, a decade ago, right? They're still checking Facebook to see updates of their grandkids, great grandkids across the nation and sending them Amazon packages. They can do it. We are too fast to judge that book at this point. How it was received is different, I think, right? So if you ask that generation, we need you to be accountable. We need you to do this. Retired school teachers love it, right? I mean, they'd come into my clinic anyhow with their little spiral notebook and taking notes on things and what they're supposed to be doing. To have that done for them, they love it. They're the best achievers that I see when I'm working with them. But there are the folks in that generation that, I don't want to do it. It's just another thing. But when we come back around and ask them questions, very frequently they admit, after I got over the fact it was one more thing to do, Matt, I've done PT before and I've never been as compliant. And I actually saw the difference happen quicker, right? Like if I hear that one or two times, it's worth some of that upfront sales struggle, basically, to say, hey, this is what we do at our clinic. I expect you to do it. Flip side of that, you got the 30-year-old, 35-year-old working individual. They're quick to sign on, but they're so stinking busy that compliance drops off, right? So it almost takes more effort in the clinic to remind them, dude, you got to do your stuff. And this is how I know you're doing it. So I think that's the disparity. So there's a little struggle in both, but as long as you lay it out up front with the patient, this is what we do at my clinic and it's going to help you. And then you remind them of that in the in-clinic, you can improve compliance in both generational sectors, right? Yeah.
That's very interesting. I guess a person like myself, I'm thinking it from the technological point of view, but you're thinking it more from the patient outcomes point of view.
Yeah.
So I think that's super, super interesting. Now RTM and small practices. For smaller clinics or independent physiotherapists, is RTM accessible or viable? Considering the potential costs and setup challenges, Matt, what do you think and what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I fully believe that the spirit of RTM has a place for the solo guy all the way up to the national chain, and everywhere in between. It might look different in terms of who owns the responsibility for doing what in each category. But if we just focus for a minute on the smaller group that maybe has a smaller budget to expend on software or do something like that, being able to provide a quality product to your patient that's going to help them, right, and then get reimbursed for that, it allows you that ability, right? So if you find a software or hardware that you believe in is going to help your product that you're delivering, and you can at minimum pay for that, it's going to be worth it. So that's one aspect to think and start seeing. The other part of it too is the solo guy or the 2 or 3 startup PTs that are doing their thing. They have to do a lot of that extra work, whether it's scheduling, call reminders. You've got the patient on the phone. You're doing that extra work. Add a therapeutic conversation within that to guide your patient one way or another before the next clinic visit. You're now getting paid for that extra time. So it's actually working pretty stinking well for somebody that's savvy enough to sit down, take the time to figure this out and where these codes can be billed. It's actually working pretty darn well for the solo guy or the home therapy, that person that kind of like represents the company that does still the patient contact, points of contact. 2, 3, 4 PTs, when you get up into that range and you're seeing more volume of patient care, especially busy outpatient places, I'm going to suggest highly and strongly that you allocate some time for one individual to kind of oversee, kind of when you get into that number of providers and patients coming through the door.
So now we are already coming to the end of this podcast episode. So I just want to close this with an advice that you want to give to peers. So how can physiotherapists who are hesitant on adopting remote therapeutic monitoring get started? What's one step they can take to begin integrating RTM into their practice?
Well, if this is the first time that they've really dug into educating themselves, listening to this podcast, that's step one. Like, educate yourself. Um, Coinciding with that is interview different companies, software, hardware companies that are providing an RTM solution, right? And what can you picture working best in your culture that you've established at your clinic level? The reason I say that is we've all done an EMR change or started EMR or switched EMRs or a billing company. And that takes months of getting used to. We all understand that as therapists. Understand that is going to be the case as you implement, see how it's affecting your workflow, and see how you can leverage things efficiently without taking away much time of your therapist, right? So as you're interviewing companies, if they provide something similar or exactly like you've been using for some time, so we're on Wibbi's podcast, it was formerly Physiotech. We had been using Physiotech as our HEP provider. There was no habitual changes for our providers other than quit printing it out and send it electronically. Matt's going to take care of the rest to assist your patients outside of the clinic. That was an easy transition. That was a no-brainer for us. Let's leverage something that we're already using or a piece. So in the outpatient world, the home exercise program comes up frequently. How can I leverage that in the way of RTM? So taking those couple things, and then the third piece of this as you're interviewing is the support, the level of support. Do you feel comfortable that those folks are going to, like I said, not make you reinvent the wheel? Listen to your culture, get to know your business, your identity. Now let's brainstorm together on how to leverage staff, leverage time, and make this efficient without causing a big rift in your clinic. If you can find a product that's going to match what you offer in your clinic and help your patients out, make it cost effective and improve your patient outcomes, and it comes with a level of guidance that you can trust to assist in training your staff and working through it, that is going to match what you desire to provide as your product in your clinic. Those would be the top three things after you kind of started to educate yourself. You can learn more as you go, but those would be the top three progressional steps to take as you're searching at this point.
That wraps up today's episode of the Wibbi podcast. And a big thank you to Matt Jurek for sharing his insights on remote therapeutic monitoring. We hope you found the conversation as inspiring and as informative as we did. So thank you very much, and we will see you the next time.
Thanks, Andres.